Gina Stone, and you're watching NCTV. This is State and Local, and my guest today is Jonathan Smith, and he's going to talk to me about something I have no understanding of. So I'm hoping that he's willing to do all the talking that he needs to do for this. This has to do with the Town Government Study Committee.
That's right.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
So when does this date back to?
This dates back a couple of years, back to town meeting in 2018, where we had two warrant articles that involved town government. One was a recall provision, as people might remember.
Yes, I do remember that.
And the other one was to form a town government study committee for a 2-year term ending in 2020. And our charge was to look at basically town government sort of in total, how it works, what really people want to have their town government be like, and what changes might be required in order to accomplish that.
Well, don't you think people are more upset about things that they see and that it really affects them, like the roads? I mean, I'm not saying that, but I mean, I think what people in town worry, I don't think they think about the intricacies of what's behind the scenes. And does any of this address, say, accountability for some of these financial?
Transparency and communication have been the main thing that we've looked at as a committee. And perhaps that would help with some of the issues that you're talking about, that people get an idea ahead of time what it takes in order to do things in town. And maybe they would want it done a different way. Mm-hmm. Often people don't want to see how the sausage is made.
That's true.
In terms of things that go on in town. And if they had a better understanding of what goes on, maybe perhaps the reaction might not be as extreme as it sometimes seems to be.
Now, have you, just being on it, have you yourself, have any secrets been revealed to you, things that you didn't know before that after you've delved into this?
Well, not to me personally, but the other members of the committee, I think, are finding out a lot about how the town government operates and what we might need to look into to consider for some warrant articles for town meeting, either in the fall or next spring.
Because I know I was telling you right before the show that there's been a lot of talk about the infrastructure and some of the things in the bylaws that stand in the way of changing that. But your issues have not had anything to do with that.
Well, we have to do with maybe how the government's structured so that it could deal with the infrastructure and other issues, and that can be done through either town bylaw changes or changes that would have to go through the state legislature to approve.
Oh, really? Now,
yes.
What have you found out so far? Can you give any ideas of what's come forward that you've
Well, the number one issue has been communication, that people don't know what's going on till either it's too late or they don't understand how things work in order to get to the way they are.
Well, when I moved here, I mean, I really wasn't involved in Medfield, but when I got here, I just got this sense of secrecy or sort of, cliques and that sort of thing. But I mean, I think that's a hard thing to overcome, isn't it? I mean, because you're still dealing with people in these boards, and I think people maybe are afraid to get on a board for fear that there'll be one or two people that are just going to run everything, and it really won't be a democratic process within the boards. So what can be done about that?
Well, one of the things that
without oversight.
Without oversight, well, really, really have to deal with the personalities of a particular board, and sometimes people come into a board with a different levels of experience or knowledge of what the board's responsibilities are, what they can do and what they can't do. And often it's what they can't do that seems to be more of a surprise to people who volunteer for boards or run for elected office.
And again, this would go back to the bylaws?
So it goes back to the bylaws. Some boards are limited by state law as to what they can do. A lot of people think selectmen can do all kinds of things, and it turns out that it's just a jumble of different laws that end up being the entirety of what a board of selectmen can do, for example. And that sometimes these boards, it's really not the actual legal power that they have, but more of being a bully pulpit for particular issues.
Well, right. That's what I was. That's really what I was trying to say. But what have you come to any remedies or solutions for? Because it's kind of a difficult thing to. I mean, all the board meetings are posted. You know, we do have the Facebook, and there is that. But I mean, in other words, people that feel like they don't know what's going on, do they really make an attempt to go to any of these meetings, or are they just complaining?
Well, that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. In other words, if there was more communication, would people actually get involved?
What else could you do beyond what do you think you might be?
We're talking about things such as having boards report every so many months on what their activities are. One of them is about having more shows on Norfolk Cable about particular issues. Another idea is to have actually something in the town bylaw that would talk about that there has to be a pre-meeting for town meeting or a review a month ahead of time where there's I guess what we would call maybe a public hearing about the budget and other matters that are on the warrant. I know there's been many attempts to try to do that through having meetings and having things online, but there are problems with the open meeting laws that prevent people from talking about things unless they have a posted meeting.
So what are the procedures? How do the meetings proceed? I mean, do people have different things that they have to look into, or how are the meetings structured?
Oh, our meetings?
Yes.
Yeah, we have different topics that people are looking at, and I think this summer we'll probably divide up, and as I mentioned at town meeting, there's a little bit of homework involved in being on this committee to research various topics.
Now, this is not the one that was going to decide whether or not to change the charter.
Well, that's one of the things, yes, that's one of the things we could do. But we're not a charter committee, because a charter committee has to come up with an entire charter for the town. And the risks of that are, if somebody finds something they don't like, they'll vote against it, and it can be a death by 1,000 cuts to keep a charter from being approved. But what we are looking at is perhaps looking at particular items and emphasizing those and whether or not they should be changed or stay the same.
Now just while you're here, now what do you mean by what would changing the charter mean?
Oh, it might mean that we don't have a board of selectmen anymore. I mean, you could go to the extreme of having a town council like Franklin, or North Attleboro just went to a town council. You could have things like term limits. For certain boards. That's one thing that we're kind of looking around at. We've had people say, well, you mentioned a point earlier about people getting involved and not having to feel like the board was being run by one or two people. Well, one of the ideas that came up in front of our board was, if there's term limits on these major boards, then new blood could come in and they might not feel intimidated by those that have been on the board for many, many years.
But then look at the fact that you don't have contested races. Well, I mean, I don't know what you can do about that.
That's supposedly one of the considerations that if you had a term limit, there would be well, we just had a contested race for selectmen this time.
Right.
And partly it was because people were getting off.
Well,
and if you had two incumbents that were running, perhaps you might not have had as much competition. It's hard to say.
Oh, yes. Well, weren't there some other uncontested? There were other uncontested races, weren't there?
Oh, most of the lower ones, and we wouldn't be. I don't think we'd be tinkering with those. Although we might, as a board, look into whether or not they should still be elected or not, based on the fact that there aren't any. There doesn't seem to be people that are running for them.
So I don't understand. You mean maybe that I don't understand what
that they be appointed boards instead of elected.
Oh, but then of course you have the old boy or the old girl system in play.
Yes.
I mean it's an admirable it's an admirable endeavor, but I think do you think like anything really could ever be? I mean, when you get right down to it, you're talking about people's attitudes and.
That's right.
And I don't know. I think this favoritism in government has become so entrenched that it's. I think it would be hard to overcome that.
No, I've been in government for about 20 years until 2009, and I didn't feel it that much. I know people have a perception of it. I think if they know more, yes, and on the school board and the advisory board. So I saw it from all different angles over time. And yes, there were people that came in and had their own personal agendas for things, but everybody seemed to be behaving themselves pretty well. When we had our forum back in March, I think it was, one of the things that came up was,
what was this? What was this for?
This was the public forum that we had that was broadcast on Norfolk Cable back in March. Our committee sponsored a public forum for people to come in and talk about what they thought of town government, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they wanted to change.
I had an injury in February, and I think I was probably lying low and not paying attention. So how did that turn out?
Well, everybody always hopes for a big turnout, and of course we got about 10 people, which is not unusual. But the people there were very animated, and we had six boards around the room, and they were filled up with a lot of ideas.
I remember now. I didn't go, but I do remember, and I did want it. Yes, that's right. And didn't Eileen Siegel? Wasn't she involved in that? Oh no, that was something else. That was something that had to do with volunteerism.
Yeah, she's in the volunteer group. Although we went to the volunteer fair and tried to get people interested in volunteering for different town boards and tried to explain what we did. But we had a couple of people talk to us over the 3 hours, but mostly people would go, we had Stony Brook on one side and we had the medical corps on the other side, and people would kind of like go from one to the other and kind of try to avoid us.
Well, I mean, it's a kind of it's a thorny problem because I mean I've said this so many times I feel like I shouldn't mention it again, but I mean when I moved here, I mean I wasn't welcome at the cable, and I was saying, somebody said, well, somebody already has a talk show, and I don't know, and I mean it was just it was incredible to me, and it really wasn't until the manager that was there, and this must be going back about maybe maybe around the year 2000 or so, had left under a very bad cloud, very dark cloud, if you remember that. And then they got different people in here, and that was when I got back into it. But, it was just a funny atmosphere of distance or something. I was on the cultural council, and they had a meeting down in one of the streets. I didn't know my way around very well, and with the streets all being dark and all. And so I did have the phone number where I was supposed to go, and I called, and I said, well, and so by the time I got there, they had turned the lights out, knowing I was still coming, and there was a dog in the house. And the dog is, so, I mean, it was just saying, turn out the lights.
Well, when we moved here in 1986, there was kind of a feeling that there were people had their little castles or whatever on certain boards, but really that's changed quite a bit I would say in the past 15 or 20 years. It's not as like that anymore.
No, it's true. It's true. So do you all, now, do you need more people on the board?
Yes, we do. We have one, we have one opening right now. And
is
yes.
it very technical? I mean, is it?
No, not particularly.
Well, what do people have to do if they can? What would they be expected to do?
Well, they would be expected to have an interest in what we're doing in terms of town government. No experience is required. No particular knowledge is expected. We just had somebody join the board, I think, that's just been in town 2 or 3 years. So that was a good thing. We were overloaded with ex-select board members for a while. See, I got to be careful. That was our warrant article this year, even though it said town clerk on the warrant, but it really was our board that had the bylaws changed to make
that really
to make all the things.
Because Anthony Turi is on that.
That's correct. He's on our. Yes, he is.
I have no patience with all that stuff. I mean, I think you can. I don't know. I would never say select board. I wouldn't say select. I would say selectman, select woman. I would never say select. I just wouldn't. I just think it's, me personally, I just think it gets a little ridiculous.
Well, I guess, I don't know how to respond to that exactly, but there is these days.
And the use of they.
That's because there are people who are non-binary, so you can't say he or she.
Yes.
And that's why, and the they was something that sounded a little unusual to people on the board when we started, but.
Well, that's exactly what it's about. And I mean, that really didn't come out with that little discussion in town meeting for some reason. And then when I said, wait a minute. I said, that's what that's about.
Yes, it is.
Is that. And so if somebody were to come on the board with you, what would they get involved? What would they have to do? What would they be expected to do?
They would be expected to be open about how they feel.
Would they need to go to board meetings?
They would need to go to our meetings.
No, your meeting. But I mean, what about the other? I mean, would they go and evaluate?
No, they wouldn't have to. They wouldn't have to. I mean, we might encourage it, but no, they don't. They don't have to do that. Sometimes we look at what goes on in other towns in terms of their rules and regulations. For example, when we were looking at the term limit issue, we looked at some other towns.
That's a big one.
We looked at some other towns, how it worked, how they worked it. And it wouldn't be that you'd be on for a certain number of years and then never be on the board again. It would mean that you'd have to take a year off or something like that before you got involved again.
Well, I mean, if you've got somebody that's doing things that you think is in the wrong way and it goes on for 14 years, 15 years, and then, a generation is practically gone by, and people really don't know of anything else or how anything else would be done, unless they're really trying to think outside the box as to whether there's another way to do this. So now, can you mention any bylaw changes that are in the works that you're considering?
Things that we were looking at, term limit was one. Another one was to have a warrant article to appropriate some money in order to look at the town structure in its entirety. Like some people are surprised at the autonomy the school committee has over things, and that's
Yes.
under law.
Yep.
We really can't do much about that, but we can look at how things are done
Here.
in town on the town side of the
Right.
revenue.
Oh, yes, there was some talk about that. I remember that. Would there be, so in terms of the transparent, well, oh, I know, excuse me, I know what I wanted to ask. I lost the train of thought. I mean, like that overrun on the police station. Who was, I mean, wasn't somebody supposed to be watching that?
Well, there was a committee.
And I guess on the Lawrence
there was
Street
a
Bridge-
committee, the Public Safety Building Committee was involved in that. Now, years ago, 20 years ago, we had a permanent building committee, but that really didn't work out, and we changed it so each project, the people that would be on it would have people that had a stake in what goes on. For example, on the Public Safety Committee, you have the police chief and the fire chief and the town administrator and a selectman were all the permanent members plus a couple members from the community. It's hard to say exactly what goes on in trying to design and build a project. I know they had trouble with the architect and some other issues that came up, but in terms of what we could do as a government study committee, I don't know if we could do much about
I didn't mean so
stuff
much
like
you individuals,
stuff.
but I mean, somebody must have been responsible for that. I mean, that big and then I understand the Lawrence Street Bridge has a big override. So when you have these projects, isn't there supposed to be somebody designated that's part of the town government for them to report to when they see these overrides and these expenses getting higher and higher? I mean,
well,
there
they
must
do
be
have
some
project. Usually, there's a project manager required on projects that get any state money, and I know Lawrence Street got some state funds in order to do that.
So, so now when do you meet?
We usually meet on Wednesdays, about twice a month we've been meeting, or maybe once a month, usually about 7:15.
In 124 or
No, usually 124 is taken. So we end up either
Upstairs?
either upstairs in the little room
Yeah.
next to
I know that little.
next to the town administrator's office, or we end up sometimes in the back room at the town clerk's office. But we're open to the public. We've had people come and watch our meetings. Not 10 people, but we've had 2 or 3 at several meetings. Mm-hmm. And we allow them to get involved too and participate.
Was it possibly considered that the minutes would be made public online of these meetings? And they're not. That's not the case now, is it?
For our meetings?
No, the meetings of these other boards.
Oh yeah, they're online now.
The minutes are online.
Yes.
But
They've caught up. They like the select board was behind by quite a bit, and because of all the changes in personnel.
Well, it was just Jack Hathaway, wasn't it?
Well, we had a secretary retire, his assistant retired, and the new people came in, and they had about a year's worth of minutes to catch up on.
Well, why were they let go like that? I mean,
Well,
if there was a secretary,
she retired.
No, I know, but why didn't somebody go right in and pick up the thread and?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. We wouldn't know the answer to that. But that's one of the things that when we first met,
I mean, this seems kind of
minutes was one of the things that we were talking about. But it's turned out they caught up, and the board realized that they.
But this is way after all that stuff was going on that they discussed.
But now they're pretty much up to date. They're within, I think, 4 to 6 weeks.
That much?
Well, that's pretty fast. It may not seem that way to the public, but to have minutes done and out and approved, that's actually a pretty good time frame.
4 weeks? A month?
I'm gonna defend them on that one.
I mean, I'm not trying to. I mean, you would take the minutes during the meeting, then you've got to enter it, and then you would print it.
Well, they have to be transcribed. They have to be transcribed
Right.
Well, it used to be tape recordings for some boards, so they just had tape
And
recorders.
then does somebody have to approve them before they?
Oh yeah, the minutes have to be approved by the board,
Itself.
the particular board itself, before they can become public.
I don't know. It just seems to me that a month to do that.
Well, that's only 2 meetings. Board of Selectmen only meet, well, at least they're trying to meet for regular meetings only twice a month.
I don't know. I just think that would be something you could do in 2 weeks.
Well, maybe they are doing that now.
Well, I learn something every day when I go and do these shows. Well, listen, we're pretty much out of time, but thank you so much for coming. And so, do you want us to should people contact you if they want to become a member? Do you want
Yes.
your email to go down on the screen?
Sure. And also to Anthony Torrey, who is our secretary, who really is sort of in charge of getting communication out to the other board members. Because we're really not allowed to talk to each other between meetings
Right.
because of the open meeting
Right.
law, which some people are trying to change that so it's not quite so restrictive.
All right, well, thank you for coming on, Jonathan. Thank
Well,
you so
thank
much
you
for coming.
for having me.
All right, thank you for watching State and Local. I'm Anne Marie Battistone. My guest was Jonathan Smith, and he's been talking about the
Town Government
Town
Study
Government Study
Committee.
Sorry. Thank you very much for watching.